Though the Central Security Building was one of the grandest structures in the dome, Alexei's mind was far too occupied to even give it a glance as he strode across the open courtyard towards the imposing portico. All that was on his mind was that it was early, too early to be anywhere but in his quarters, and that wasn't even considering that it was his first morning back on Terran after 2 consecutive tours of duty on the frontier. He muttered to himself that the crew deserved better than this after what they had been through. The click of his heels on the tiled walkway seemed to drill sharply into his brain, reminding him that last night was supposed to have been a quick gathering. It was always the same at the end of a tour. Everybody patted each other on the back, said what a great job they had done, and then quickly went their separate ways. As commander, it was expected that he shout the first round before melting away as serious celebrations began. But it hadn't turned out that way. Instead of leaving once he had seen them relax, he had felt the need to stay, and stay, and stay. Now he was paying for it. His head felt thick, his body felt tired. He desperately needed a krill tablet, not being woken with a summons to come immediately to Ellis's offices. That was the last thing he needed. "Why do they keep the place so cool?" he muttered, his finger adjusting the thermal valve secreted under the uniform lapel. Immediately he felt more comfortable, though he often wondered how much of that was in his mind. Outside the weather shield he could see the snow, deep and endless up into the foothills, and on over the peaks of Telek Nail. Bad mood or not, he begrudgingly admitted, it did look remarkably beautiful, especially with the green high forests trusting out of the blanket of white. At times such as this it puzzled him why the ancestors had chosen Terran to colonize, when they had all the other warmer planets to choose from. Still another half a revolution and they would have left the white dwarf that was the binary partner of Sol, and be back in the warmth. Then there would be an explosion of growth. Rainforest vegetation in the coastal regions and baking deserts up on the tablelands. Once more the heat would take over, banishing the cold to the other end of the season. Thinking about it, actually he could see why they had chosen Terran. He smiled to himself. "Good morning, Commander." The voice surprised. No, not surprised, startled him back to reality. "Good morning, Isla," he replied to the electronically induced sound from his ear implant. "Director Ellis has been informed of your arrival." "What mood is he in?" "Have I your confidence, Commander?" Alexei wondered for a moment who such an attractive, and he had to admit appealing tone of speech, had once belonged to. He put out of his mind that apparently each individual heard what appealed particularly to him, or her. "Of course, Isla." "Then he is rather grumpy." "Oh." That he didn't want to hear. "Any reason?" "Not that I can divulge, Commander." "I see, you don't know." "Yes I do, Commander," the voice sounded faintly offended. "And you're going to keep it a secret?" "I have to, Commander." "You know very well to not do as I am bid would go against the rule of my existence." "Yes I know, but even to me?" He tried to sound hurt. "You put me in a position where my friendship goes against my duty, Commander." "I see. And which shall win? Is there any doubt?" Alexei sighed deeply, in mock rejection. "I suppose I will have to live with being no more than a castaway, an ignored ex-friend." "Commander, I doubt you would ever consider yourself as such." "No, Isla," he grinned, feeling his mood rising as he looked towards at the first rays of sunlight, glinting off the mountaintops. "And neither do I imagine you would do anything wrong, even for a moment." Isla giggled. "Ah, Commander, you never know?" "Don't tell me, you're waiting for the right processor to..." Alexei stopped and shook his head. What a start, he was flirting with a series of induced vibrations in his inner ear. "Commander?" "Yes. Actually, if I look over my parameters." Director Ellis did not specify. I was not to reveal that he is not alone. "Who is he with?" "A Professor Thane." Thane. No, means nothing to me. An anthropologist, at the astrohistory faculty of the College of Cisse, on Tiber Anwin. Oh, he said with mock enthusiasm. That sounds very exciting. Commander, the voice was slightly scolding. Not everyone needs, or sees the life of a soldier as the ultimate achievement. No. I'm sorry. You're quite correct, somebody has to do all the boring stuff. There was no reply. Damned processors, he muttered silently. Sometimes they were like being joined, you had to be careful with every word or you were always upsetting the other half. His mind suddenly wandered to her. It had been this time during last freezing, when they had agreed to separate. It still hurt a little. He had really thought they would be partners for life, but relationships had never been his strong point, and it didn't look as if that was going to change. Thankfully it had been reasonably amicable. What he hadn't expected though was that she would leave after the agreement had been voided, and go back to live on Raygon, taking their 3 beautiful children with her. He hadn't, and still didn't want them to go. Yes, practicality, it was the best thing for them, but that didn't mean he had to like it. His mind drifted to their faces. It had been a long time since he had felt their embraces. Yes, he decided, when I've finished with Ellis, I'll comlink Raygon and ask if I can visit, of course assuming Zara will give her permission. He was in front of the building now. It was set at 8 levels above ground, being as there was little chance at this time of the turn that of one of the violent tropical hurricanes would sweep in from the ocean. Though if one did it wasn't really a problem, it was common knowledge that within 20 parts the whole structure could descend below the surface against nature, or even quicker if under threat of attack by a Carol warship. The door was opening. Isla may not be communicating but was still doing what was required. He walked onto the inner 6th level. Immediately the sound of bird calls came to his ears. Long slender trunks of polywattle vine reached up to the roof of the atrium. Therein lower down swung flocks of brightly colored parrots. A primate sat on a branch at his level watching him suspiciously. Over the balustrade to his right, 6 floors down, was a small indoor lake. He could just make out the reds and pinks of flapfish swimming close to the surface. It was all very soothing and peaceful, but Ellis was waiting, and the Vader door was opening for him. He stepped inside. "I'm sorry," he said. "Sorry. I don't know what you're referring to, Commander." The reply was half curious. "Everybody has their place. Everybody has their duty, and just because I find it of little interest, I should not belittle them." "No, you shouldn't, Commander." The voice bore a slight chastising tone. "None are greater, or less useful than another in our society. That is what makes us different from the Karo." "This professor," he interrupted. "Thane? Thane," he repeated to himself. "Yes. What has astrohistory got to do with a destroyer's officer? We are all a product of our roots, Commander. It's too early to be cryptic, Isla." "I wasn't. I was merely pointing out that we are the sum of our communal experience. I realize that. But there's nothing from the past where I live. I cruise a warship. Fighting on the frontier, protecting the colonies, the future is all that I'm interested in. Many have said and thought the same throughout the history of humankind, and found that the highway to one's destiny is learned on the byroads of the past. You're not going to tell me anything else before I face Ellis, are you?" "No, Commander." The Vader stopped and the door slid open. He stepped into the outer office. It was empty, except for Alana sat before her screen, entering something into her workstation. She looked up from behind the desk, lifting her hand as she did, deliberately pushing with her index finger at the bridge of a pair of antique spectacles that were the current fashion. The lenses seemed to hang magically against her forehead. Commander, she beamed with obvious pleasure. How nice it is to see you again. And for me to see you, Alana. How do things look on the frontier? Not as nice as they look from where I stand right now. Commander, she blushed. You know I'm almost a partner. All the more reason to tell you, before it's too late and Ander claims his prize. Suddenly a booming voice assaulted his ears. Is that you, Commander? Alexei hadn't noticed the door was partly open. Yes, Director, he answered formally. Then come through, and stop harassing my secretary. She has enough to do without you interrupting her. Director Ellis is waiting to see you, Commander, said the silently laughing girl. Alexei shook his head as he walked towards the heavy door. He pushed it fully open. Ellis was standing alongside a large ornate chair. Another was across to his left, and between them was the back of a couch, upholstered in the same brocade material. They formed a semicircle before a timber-fueled fire, burning in a large open grate set into the wall opposite. To Alexei's left was the panorama of the snow-covered mountains. The window was floor-to-ceiling, and wall-to-wall. As a first impression, it appeared the building had no external wall, and many visitors stayed well clear, for in the unaccustomed it caused a distinct feeling of vertigo. Here they were far above the weather shield, and even Alexei had a momentary feeling of warmth on his right and cold on his left. He quickly turned the thermal valve off. Director? Come in, Commander, the voice was barely warmer than before. And shut the door. Alexei backstepped, then strode silently across the carpeted floor. He had forgotten the third person in the room. Indeed, he still couldn't see anyone hidden behind the high back of the couch. It wasn't until he came alongside it that he saw her. It hadn't crossed his mind it could be a woman. Now he wondered why. She was striking. Long black hair, a perfectly formed face. She was dressed in the latest Terran suit. Alexei knew that from a magazine he had seen lying on some wardroom table recently. She was standing now and offering her arm. Commander. Their fingers clasped about each other's wrists. She felt cool. Professor Thane, Alexei said, half as a greeting, half with incredibility. Isla, muttered Ellis to his side disapprovingly. He stared vaguely into the air. Close surveillance on my area. Then he looked back at Alexei. You can let go of the professor's hand now, Commander, he grumbled. Alexei realized it was only he who continued the grip. He dropped his arm to his side. I see you already know all about the professor, continued Ellis. No. Well, he looked at her. Only that you are an anthropologist from the astrohistory faculty, at CSA. Nearly right, Commander, she smiled. Alexei looked at Ellis slightly confused. Isla was rarely wrong. The man grunted and spoke. I take the wise precaution of not disclosing everything I do, even to Isla. But Professor Thane. Director. She interrupted him. If we are to work together, it would be much easier if I dropped my formal title. As you wish, Ellis said as he sat down in a single chair. My name is Ria. She looked at Alexei. Alexei. Yes. I did know, she smiled and his heart missed a beat. She sat down again. As you surmised, I am from CSA, and from the College of Astrohistory. But I am afraid from there on all else becomes a little blurred. I have an office and a workroom in the anthropology faculty, but I am not an anthropologist. She looked at Ellis, as if seeking his approval. He nodded at her, and then looked at Alexei. Sit down, Commander, you're making me feel uncomfortable standing there like a piece of furniture. Alexei walked to the other chair as she started to speak again. My position is actually a cover. I work for the DSD. For a moment Alexei was dumbfounded, and equally impressed. The Department of Scientific Defense was one of the most secretive organizations within the Alliance. There was only one acknowledged office, that was here on Terran, and it employed no more than a dozen people. Of course it was common knowledge, or rather common gossip, that their research facilities were spread throughout the planets, but this was the first time, even with the rank he held, that he had ever had official confirmation the organization existed outside the department's headquarters, never mind met one of its operatives. Alexei realized he had frozen half-seated. He quickly sat and sank into the soft cushion. She seemed amused. "I take it you know of us." "Alexei?" "Yes." "Well, kind of. I assume that means you have listened to rumors?" "Well, yes. To be honest, I haven't a clue, other than I probably owe my life to suggestions, ideas, and weapons that you have come up with. Do not give me credit personally, Alexei. I'm no more than a contributor." She winked at him. He hadn't the foggiest idea what it implied. "My personal expertise is in liquid ferroceramics." Suddenly it came to him. "Thane," he said out loud, interrupting her mid-sentence. She stopped and looked at him in surprise. It had been at the back of his mind since he had heard Isla say the name. But the stern and very dowdily dressed woman behind the podium bore little resemblance to the one before him now. "Last summer's season I attended reassignment on Talabi. There was a lecture on Ceralium. It was very interesting." He beamed in satisfaction. "Why, Alexei, you surprise me." "That I remember?" "No, more that you listened. I thought my entire audience was asleep." They both smiled, until Ellis's gruff voice interrupted. "Can we get on with the business we are here for, Professor?" They fell silent as he took the conversation over. "What the Professor is trying to tell you, Commander, is that composite metals and their derivatives are her area of specialization. And the reason she is here is that there are none better." Rhea looked at Alexei. "Flattering, but not true, Director. There are many people who are my equal." Ellis brushed of her diffidence. "Professor, modesty is all well and good, but by my information you come to me recommended as the best, and that's who I want." "I said my equals, Director. I did not say they were better." "Then please carry on." Rhea suddenly seemed less comfortable. "Commander, future composites are where I am, but we can still learn a lot from analysis of the older and past metals." Alexei smiled and thought to himself, "I've already been here." She was looking at him puzzled. "Commander? Please go on." "As I was saying, I find it personally interesting. I suppose it could class as a hobby, researching old, rare and disused metals and ores. And an ideal cover at CSA. It fits in quite nicely." "Yes, but where do I fit into all this?" "You don't yet," said Ellis abruptly. "Please continue, Professor. In my capacity I have direct access to all Alliance research projects. Recently one of our deep space mining vessels located a probe." Alexei stared at her curiously. "Probe? What? A drone? Call it what you like. It was way out in the void area. Heading for Beta Prima, in another 100,000 turns. Anyway, they were testing deep rock spectrum equipment and had the full range turned on, and there you are, they picked up radioactive decay in the middle of nowhere. They surmised it was an exotic asteroid at first, but the emission was too pure, so they were instructed to send out a scout. And there it was, a probe." Alexei looked at a loss towards Ellis. The man sat expressionless. "It was of tremendous, but limited scientific interest," continued Rhea. "And in due course it found its way to CSA, where I requested permission to undertake an analysis of the metals." She hesitated, seeing his expression. "There is something you find curious, Commander?" He tried to look serious. "You said there was an emission. It was from the probe?" "Yes. The research was all done in the emissions laboratory. Its power core was rhenium. Does that stir any memory?" "Vaguely. I've never come across it, but I seem to remember from college that it's very dangerous and volatile, isn't it? Handled the wrong way, most certainly. If I recall correctly, it said it would be the first generated clean power that an emerging civilization would come across. I suppose that depends on the interpretation of clean you're using. Anyway, the metal parts themselves were corroded almost beyond belief. Wherever it had come from, it had been alone in space for many thousands of turns. Its composition was intriguing, basic and impure, yet a fresh perspective, as if someone had been working from an entirely new set of rules. So it was an alliance? She looked at him, puzzled. Alliance? He saw he was mistaken. Then it was a Carol probe? There was almost a smile on her face. He looked at Ellis, confused. "You are assuming it's a probe from sometime in our own past?" "Yes," he said uncertainly, unable to imagine an alternative. "I suppose that a fair assumption," Rhea said, as if to accommodate his opinion. "But as I said, it was if whoever had created it was going down another technological path. It was all extremely interesting." Her tone of voice changed. "But my excitement over its manufacture was nothing compared to what was attached to the side." She paused a moment, but Alexei showed no anticipation. There was a small golden plaque. The surface was almost degraded clean, but in our laboratories we were able to reconstruct what patterns or symbols had once been engraved there by examining the sublayer stress marking. And we found that on it the makers had identified themselves. She looked at Ellis, again seeking his approval, then back to Alexei, and straight into his eyes. "Have you heard of the planet Earth?" They both looked at him, and he at them. Nothing was said. At last he shook his head and started to laugh. "Yes, I know about Earth." And he did. It was required reading in grade school, under Legends and Fantasies. When a little older he had sat through an elective class on the myth, bored out of his mind. So he did know about Earth, but if it hadn't have been for his awakening interest in the opposite sex, particularly for a girl named Juliana, he wouldn't have had a clue. Earth, the home planet of the ancestors. They had destroyed it with wars and contamination before they were driven off as its temperature climbed past human tolerance. The story said they had lived for a few generations in massive orbiting satellite cities called arcs, before they gave the planet up as lost and set sail on a convoy to colonize another star system. Then at some time there had been the diverging, in the arcs, there were supposed to have been 60 of them, split into two factions. One founded Terran and the others colonized Plar, as the corporation's headquarters. They had been at war ever since. Earth. They both stared at him without speaking. "Are you serious?" he said disbelievingly. Neither replied. His reply was far less humorous as he realized. "You are serious?" "Commander," Ellis at last spoke, sitting forward in his chair. "When you come through that door, everything that is discussed, is serious. Yes, dire. And I advise you that if you think this is some kind of entertainment venue, you use it to walk right back out of here." His voice firmed. "Right, now." "I am sorry, Director," he turned to the woman. "Professor. I meant no disrespect." "That is debatable, Commander," snorted Ellis. "You are well known for your attitude, sometimes it borders on near arrogance. I tell you this, that there are those in the inner sanctum who argued against you being chosen, to the point of implying that you are dangerous to your own side." "Director," Alexei blurted out defensively. Your loyalty is not under question at this time, Commander. I accept that. It is how you have occasion to use it. Ellis grunted as he relaxed back into the cushions. Alexei, said Rhea softly into the tense atmosphere. I know the existence of Earth is relegated to mystics and fringe cultures, and I will readily admit that I too, until recently, didn't give the stories too much credit. Each culture needs its legends, we have ours, and strangely or not, it is the same as the corporations. But we could quite possibly have had a mutual origin with or without it being on a planet on the other side of the galaxy. And before you say it, yes, it was very convenient that the ark carrying humankind's entire history was lost. Neither do I know where the remaining arks or any trace of them are, or if proof anything in the legends ever existed. It is up to one to believe, and I did not until I opened that crushed little spacecraft. Now I know, Alexei, Earth does. Or did exist. Her words were so passionate, so spoken from the heart that Alexei could not reply. At last he mumbled a few words. Professor. Rhea. I'm sorry. I do not doubt your sincerity. I plead that you were right, and our culture can have had such an origin, rather than being the planet hoppers we know ourselves as. Yes, I want to believe, but I can't. I am a soldier. I must believe what I see for myself. That's enough, snapped Ellis. I've heard what I want to hear from both of you. He stood up and walked to the hearth, reached onto the mantelpiece and took a smoking pipe from the shelf. Only the crackle of the fire echoed around the room as he stuffed a small wad of brown shredded leaf into the pipe's bowl. He bent down and lit a taper from the flames and drew deeply. Well, Commander. For a second Alexei thought he was about to be dismissed. Are you prepared to do what you claim? Claim? Director, I don't know what is being asked of me. As I have said, I am a soldier. With all due respect, history is, well, at least this kind of history, is of no use to me on the bridge of the warrior. Well, that's where you are so very wrong, Commander. More wrong than you realize. Our future lies 40,000 turns in the past, and the ship you command is one of the very few that can ensure us any future at all. I still don't understand. But Alexei lied. He knew what was about to be said, but his heart refused to accept it until he heard the words. Damn it, Commander, are you thick? I want you to return to the beginning of our history. I'll do it. Came the immediate and abrupt reply. What? Yes. Well, good. Then it is settled. He looked at Rhea. 2 parts, did you say, Professor? Yes. Then there is only one more thing. Commander, this mission could be more dangerous than it sounds. I want every single member of your crew to volunteer. There will be no problem, Director. There's not one of them that haven't already put their life on the line. When I tell them, they will fight for the chance. That's the point, they are not to know. Not to know. Not to know what, Director? Nothing, Commander. Nothing at all. I want every one of your crew to volunteer to blindly follow you. But my I.C? Not even your second in command. Alexei was a military man, he understood security, but their lives depended on logistics. I understand, Director, but the warrior needs appropriate data and adequate fuel, and the crew needs suitable provisions. Not your navigator, not your engineer, not even whoever it is who runs your canteen. Nobody, Commander. It was a direct order, and he tried to hide his displeasure. Even under the condition, he had no doubt they all would leap at the opportunity, but his command ran a little differently to that. Yes, he was ultimately in control, that was beyond question, but his door was always open. It was what made him, him. What had he been called during his last appraisal? Erratic. Yes, he was. If a good idea came up in a briefing and it wasn't his, Or what he would normally do, he still used it, and on occasion with spectacular results. The corporation could vouch for that. But this was different, they had a right to know. "Well, Commander," pressed Ellis, "I will put it to my crew as you order, Director." Ellis looked at him coldly as if weighing the answer as defiance. "Do what you want. Tell them what you like, but nothing that will indicate why, what or where they will be going. Understand?" Alexei nodded sullenly. Ellis looked at Rhea. "You can give it to him." She opened an attached case laid beside her chair, and took out a green pouch. "The other," said Ellis. "It's inside." She handed it to Alexei. Alexei unclipped the catch. Green was for scientific projects. Inside he saw a data tablet and a smaller red pouch. He looked up at Ellis. "The green folder contains all the loading and departure information for an exploratory trip to Penjas 3, said Ellis. "Ruins were found there recently, and being as it is in the Forbidden Zone, a warship will seem appropriate for carrying civilians. Basically it says you're going for a quick investigation of the site." "And the red?" asked Alexei. "When you get to the point designated as limit of last survey, you will contact CSA and inform them that you are about to enter uncharted Penjas space. They will tell you to commence the survey. At that point you will open those sealed orders and change your heading to that described in those documents. From that moment you will personally ensure that no further communications leave your vessel. Once done, and not a moment before, you can inform your crew you are about to enter tachyon space." "Time travel?" Alexei gasped before he had chance to think. "I prefer the other terms, but yes." Alexei felt compelled to point out the obvious. "Director, as a commander it is not for me to question a mission, but time options are against the Articles of Warfare." "No, it is not for you to question orders, Commander, but as long as you follow a strict secrecy regime, the corporation will never know. Anyway, by your reputation, I doubt another transgression would seem to bother you too much." Again Rhea came in as peacemaker. "Alexei, Earth is a long way away, even using the closest folds in space-time. Even at light speed it could take many turns to get there. The director tells me that your spacecraft has been into tachyon time and you're back here now." "Yes. We have bored past the barrier, but purely as a test." He glanced cautiously at Ellis before continuing. "I assume that it has been revealed to you that the Warrior is one of the few craft that has the whole integrity to attempt such a feat, but it wasn't outlawed for no good reason. There is a distinct chance of disintegration, and for the odds of ending up in another universe." Alexei opened his arms wide. She looked at him. "I know the risks. I am prepared to take them." Her words surprised him. "You? I'm coming with you. Didn't you understand that?" "Well, no. I thought a few science officers, but I am." "Of course. I'm sorry. There is so much to consider. My party will be small, myself and 4 others. 5, plus the Warrior's crew. You know the accommodation arrangements? That it is not designed for that many people? I have been told." He didn't look forward to sharing the Warrior with civilians, especially being as at least one of them would be DSD, but he tried to sound cooperative. "I'm sure we can manage, though all of our accommodation will be cramped." "More than you think, Commander," said Ellis. "You will also be taking a considerable amount of specialized equipment." "I see. That's why the 2 parts. Time for your ship to be stripped of everything but essentials. It is a warship, Director. I believe everything already has been taken to that level." He smiled weakly. "That we will see," muttered Ellis. "Very well, Commander. Go, do what is necessary." Alexei stood. There was one thing, and that is tachyon time. I am greatly concerned that my crew will not have the opportunity to consider its consequences before volunteering. We are at war, Commander. Each time you lift off could be the last. You know that, and they know that. It is something you have already accepted. It is up to you to carry the gravity of the situation to them however you like. But I will warn you that the warrior will go with your crew, or replacements. With you as commander, or with another. Is that clear? Yes, Director. Ellis looked threateningly at him. And any person who happens to find out the destination before you depart will be shipped off to do duty in the furthest mining colony I can find, until you return. Is that clear? As crystal, Director. Ellis looked at the timepiece on the wall. I will allow you until after the mid-meal to make arrangements and inform your crew to be back on the 17th. Any that are not back will report to Fleet Administration for reassignment. Including yourself. Some will have arranged shuttles to their home planets. That is not much time for them to change their plans. Then go, Commander. More time passes even as we talk. Alexei walked back to the door. Part of him was bursting with excitement at what lay ahead. He was ready to go now, and he was certain the others would be with him, if only he could tell them. He had never lied to them before. Yes, he had bent the truth, but not the outright lie he felt he was now faced with. It sat heavily on him. They all could die, and not even in a blaze of glory. They would just pop out of existence, and no one would ever know. What the hell if the corporation found out? They didn't want to burn cinder any more than the Alliance did. He passed his hand over the door activator and pulled it open, then stopped and turned. Ellis was leaning down towards Rhea. Alexei spoke hesitantly, the inner sanctum. Ellis looked up. What about it? Another commander was considered. You are commander of the vessel. Protocol determines only that you be considered first. He went to speak to the professor again, but Alexei persisted. I was spoken against. Prove me wrong, Commander. Ellis said dismissively as he bent back towards the woman, turning his back on Alexei as if to end the conversation. Alexei closed the door behind him. Walking through the blast doors and onto the gantry rail, Alexei leaned forward to gaze down at the warrior. A feeling of pride swept through him. It was always the same. She was his. His alone. How could Ellis have threatened to put someone else in the command seat? The flowing shape of the sleek saucer showed it was built for both atmosphere and deep space. But those seductive lines were the only thing that pleased him. Around and about it the scene was chaotic. Crates and packages were strewn across the service bay as if a cyclone had been through. Technicians and mechanics jostled for entry or exit from the hull, even including the emergency pod. Alexei doubted he thought of the warrior as female, had ever had as many souls on board since she came out of assembly. He ran his hand loosely over the rail and started down the gantry steps. The voices didn't get louder as he descended, they just became clearer from the clatter and hum of machinery. Above them all was the voice of Clarice, as she demanded and cajoled workers and machinery to their tasks. He had no need to ask, the warrior was in capable hands, and tonight the adventure would begin. There was no sensation of movement, other than through the solar shield they could see that the warrior was slowly lifting off the service floor. Already the heavy bay doors were almost retracted into the ground. This was it, thought Alexei, up and off into the wild blackness, too. Well, who knew where? It did trouble him slightly. Of course, on a tour of duty he never knew where they would actually end up. Even pre-academy he had piloted with his father, underage, unqualified, and illegally on a couple of explorations to the forbidden areas. But this time it was different. They really were going out into the unknown. He wondered how she felt. He turned in his chair, nodded to Clarice, and looked back towards Rhea. "Professor, would you like to give the command?" "Me? Oh. What do I say?" He smiled to himself. "What comes to your mind?" "Air. Let's go." She smiled, stumbling over the few words, unsure of what was needed. "That'll do." Already they were moving forwards, and out onto the launch ramps. He looked out beyond the mountains towards the final rays of the setting sol. His eyes lifted slightly to the wide view of their rear presented on a screen above the solar screen. "Number 1? Clarice barely looked up from her workstation. "All systems going mainstream, Commander. Engine 17% standard drive. Climb rate 75 degrees. He looked around at the darkening landscape. "Terran, when would they see it again?" "What did you say before, Professor?" "Me? Let's go. Is that right?" She needed no answer. With barely a feeling of movement, the landscape suddenly dropped below the screen. Outside, the dark mountains rapidly became the pitch blackness of outer space, peppered as it was with many billion specks of light. Above the solar screen, the white planet shrunk away on the rear view. Alexei stood. "You have the ship, number 1. He looked down at the seated woman. "Well, Professor, we are on our way. There's nothing for us to do now but wait until we are ready to commence the survey. Can I get you some refreshment?" "No thank you, Commander. I have much still to do, and right now I need to talk with my associates." She stood and briskly left the cabin. For a few moments Alexei stood wondering if he should follow. Refusing an invitation from the commanding officer was not normal protocol on a warship, but considering she was a civilian, and a scientist at that, maybe she didn't understand. He decided to take refreshments alone. It was not a wise decision. Without a distraction, his doubts began to trouble him. Maybe it was a response he had evolved to counter the unpredictability of conflict, but he liked to run the ship and his life in a regulated way, and events were not working out as he had hoped. He found Rhea a very attractive woman, though of course he couldn't be overly obvious about it. They were both in charge of their respective commands, but maybe a friendship? Maybe later back on Terran something more could develop. Right now it didn't look likely. In fact, since she and the other scientists had come aboard, she had almost gone to the point of being dismissive of him. Yes, she was engrossed in her work, and apparently had been from the moment the first equipment had arrived on the Warrior, continually attending to some problem or another. Occasionally she had come for advice, but each time she had seemed to get frostier. So okay, an affair was out of the question, but was friendship too much to ask? He shrugged it out of his mind and walked along the narrow, now narrower corridor to the canteen, and opened the door. 3 crew members and 2 scientists were sitting around the table set in the center of the room. The crew huddled at one end and the scientists at the other. So it wasn't just him. There was a divide already established between the civilians and his own. It was not good. They needed to act as a team. He was commander. He couldn't allow things not to flow, but at his own level he was having the same problems. It wasn't his or their making. Military and civilians never mixed. It was one of those paradoxes peculiar to the human species. Nobody liked the idea of war and killing, even he, if the truth was known, but without an armed defense, Terran would have centuries ago become a subsidiary of the Carroll Corporation. Maybe when they all knew what the mission was about, it would be different. The thought suddenly came to him, do the scientists already know? It couldn't be just a general survey party. Surely that would be wasteful to send simple archaeologists rather than planetary specialists. And if they were specialists, would their specialty be the same on Penjas 3 as on Earth? For a moment Alexei was irrationally angry. Had they been picked for their expertise, and knew what was expected of them, yet it was deemed that his crew was less than trustable? Alexei pushed another doubt to the back of his mind. He was falling into the same trap that all the others seemed to be. Kale, he said loudly to the central crew member. Kale was systems analyst. Usually a position of some tedium, for the warrior generally looked after herself, but not always. Those times, especially in battle, Kale's job became colossal. A system offline rendered the warrior weak, or at worst helpless. That had never come to pass. To Alexei's mind, Kale was the best. Our guest's requirements are not causing you any problems? None that are of any concern, Alexei. He spoke casually, and without any regard that he was talking to his commanding officer. There was no need. Here in the canteen, was the unofficially acknowledged, non-rank area aboard the warrior. In this small room the lowest to highest ranks would speak their minds, or air their grievances. Alexei had made it clear to every member of the crew that anything went in this room, but outside he expected total commitment. And it had worked. As a team they flowed around any problem like Mercury, apparently until now. A young blonde woman was moving her seat, making room for Alexei. Kat was weapons officer. She was short, by a head and more than Alexei. Petite, and without being unkind, plainly attractive. Yet probably the most deadly female Alexei had ever met. The image of a woman behind a gun often didn't sit right on the female gender. It was assumed women's nurturing, maternal, and preservation instincts would always be stronger, and to a point that was true. Kat had a side so soft and caring that she had gathered a reputation for being an easy meal, or home to any stray creature in the system. But like their casual approach to each other in this room, when she sat in gun bay command, she was a different person. Nothing came in the way of her destroying the enemy. There had been rumors of mistreatment by the corporation on her birth planet before her sister had smuggled her out. She never spoke of what had happened, or of her family. Alexei sat between her and Grunt. It was a nickname the second woman wore not with pride, but as more of a statement. Her real name was Wendy. She was the complete opposite to Kat. A tower of a woman, and as strong as any man aboard. Wendy had done her training on fleet freighters, and had worked up to leading engineer. A fellow crewman, drunk in a bar one night, had provoked her, laughing to his friends about the noises she made when wrenching open a reluctant bolt or fitting. He lived to regret it, but only just. She nearly lost her job, never mind her freedom. As it was, she was reduced in rank, and now was assistant engineer. Since her problem, Wendy demanded that all aboard call her Grunt off duty. She claimed it was part of her punishment for not holding her temper, and every moment she needed to be reminded of that. Alexei didn't believe that was true, and he could see a good side to her demotion. It was selfish, but now he had two first-class engineers. Alexei thought again how lucky he was to have these people as part of his crew. "Number 3 with 2, said Kale, getting up and stepping a couple of paces to the dispenser. "No. 5 with 3, answered Alexei. "Bad orbit, eh?" "Bad 4 orbits. The trip didn't go too well," said Kat sympathetically. "Yeah, it was great," he said unconvincingly. "It just didn't work out exactly as planned." She knew enough to ask no more. "How are the girls?" "Terrific. Really good." "They'll be growing up?" "Yeah, a turn away from them, and they seem to have grown 10. Alexei didn't really want to talk about it. He looked across to the scientists. They were talking quietly between themselves. "No problems with your team?" he inquired of the men. "One," Ferguson Alexei vaguely remembered. He was the smaller of the two, though that was marginal. His main difference was that he appeared more wiry than the second, spoke. "Everything is adequate, Commander. Obviously we would have preferred more room for more equipment, but apparently we have already overused our allowance. We are all making sacrifices." Alexei tried not to sound sarcastic. Quite so, still I suppose we can wait until the main thrust arrives. Main thrust, echoed Alexei, his interest suddenly aroused. I mean, until we can organize a major expedition. The ruins will have to be properly excavated. The man was suddenly standing. He pushed at his companion's shoulder. If you will excuse us. We have work to do. They quickly left the room. What was all that about? Said Alexei, looking at his fellow crew members. Who knows, said Kale, placing a steaming mug in front of him. They're a weird lot, these scientists. Maybe so, but until we get back to Terran, we're all going to have to live together. It was 3 hours later that Alexei had chance to talk to Rhea alone, or as close to it as was possible. I need to know something. Go ahead and ask. What's the main thrust? He was watching her eyes as he spoke. It was imperceptible, but the twitch told him all he needed to know. The what? The main thrust. Something to do with your engines, I suppose. Her reply annoyed him. Professor, the ship and my crew are at your disposal, but I won't accept putting either at risk. Her reply was sharp. Isn't that the point of a warship? No, the idea is to know what we're up against so there is no risk. Well, I'm no mystic, so I can't help you. I don't need help, just to know what's going on. Has this got something to do with my work? Or is it some kind of machismo kick you expect as commander of this vessel? Against all he knew, he let his annoyance get the better of him. Don't let's start playing games. Something is going on that I don't know about, isn't it? Nothing is going on. She said firmly, as they stared hostilely at each other. So is there something else? Or can I get on with my work? She almost snarled. No, Professor. It seems there's nothing further for us to discuss. She strode away, leaving him as angry as he had been in ages. From a distance, Pengus 3 was as uninspiring as Alexei had expected, consequently he took little interest above a cursory inspection. We are the limit of the last survey, he said to Rhea, stood beside him. She nodded noncommittally. It seems it's time to revisit our directions. Apparently so. He looked at his second in command. Inform Cisse that we are about to enter uncharted Pengus space, then lock the communications console and join us in my cabin. Her curt nod of understanding, merged with a look of curiosity. Alexei opened the small safe, put in his hand and withdrew the red satchel. He turned to face Clarice coming through the door. Number 1. There are some changes to our flight orders. She looked between him and Rhea. Sit down, this may take some explaining. She sat alongside Rhea on Alexei's bunk. Together they looked much the same. Age, build, Clary's hair was maybe a little redder. Both striking women, both at the pinnacle, or close to it, in their respective careers, and both very driven personalities. His second in command listened without the emotion, or the frivolity that Alexei had displayed as he had been briefed on the probe and its implications. She looked at the red pouch. That's where we're going. Yes. He dropped it on the bench to his side. I wanted you to know before the rest of the crew. I'm afraid it's not much before, but I owe you priority. I understand. I hope you do. These last 2 parts 1 have felt guilty of betraying yours and the crew's trust. It was not of your making or choice, Commander. In any case, we, and I speak for everybody on the Warrior, will go wherever we are needed. You don't have to explain or remind us of our duty. I know. I never doubted. I just wish I could have told you before. She looked at the satchel. Well, Commander. Put us out of our suspense. The command deck was packed. It was never designed for this many people at one time. Alexei faced a stunned silence. He had tried to look at everyone's reaction as he announced their destination. Everybody, or almost everybody, other than the two scientists from the previous meeting, who seemed a little bored, showed some kind of reaction. "Isn't that very dangerous?" one asked meekly. Alexei gave a glance to Clarice. "Abbott," she whispered. "Yes, Mr. Abbott. It can be, but the warrior has tunneled on test before." "But what's the other side? I mean, what's there?" Alexei almost sighed. "I can't answer that." "Can't answer?" the scientist said indignantly. "What, it's some kind of military secret?" "No. I can't answer because I don't know." "You don't know?" "In theory, yes, but not by experience." "But you said this ship had been there?" "It has. We all have, but it was a controlled exercise. We tunneled, entered tachyon space, and then immediately dropped back out. Observations must have been made. To all intents and purposes, the other side is the same as this side." "But you don't know?" "This is not a suicide mission. There are extreme dangers, so I won't deny or hide them, but there theoretically is no reason why the warrior will not be able to tunnel safely." "But right now we don't have a choice, do we?" pressed Abbott. "At this point, no. This briefing is to inform you, not to get your approval. You all have given that when you signed up. I realize that some of you are not accustomed to deep space travel, but my crew are competent to undertake tunneling, and cope with any contingency." Well, almost any contingency, he thought. That may occur. If any of you would like clarification of anything related to this ship, I'm happy to talk to you individually. If anyone has questions about Earth, I suggest you talk to Professor Thane. Out of the corner of his eye he saw her shoot him a look of disapproval. It gave him a satisfied feeling. Now, unless anyone has any more questions, the crew needs to begin preparations. The black hole grew before them. It was an awesome sight. Even though they were common, too common for some, the majesty, the power, the beauty they held would never diminish for him. They were already in its gravitational grip, their engines on idle as they were ever faster sucked inwards. Rhea had noticed that the craft had started buffeting, nothing serious, just a kind of vibration running up through her body, but enough to unnerve her. As if he knew her mind, Alexei half turned in the command chair, speaking over his shoulder. "It may be more comfortable if you fasten your gravity straps, Professor." Quickly, almost too quickly, she reached above her shoulder and pulled the clasp out and around her body. It was the one single belt, but it seemed to envelop her. "Don't destroyers have neutralizers? Our previous test showed that what we are about to experience is far greater than normal systems can cope with." His words were far from comforting. She had been apprehensive about the whole tunneling process from the start. Okay, if they were going to die, so be it, but that didn't mean she wanted the process prolonged. Her mind was diverted by Clary's voice. 70%. "Commander," said Rhea anxiously. "Yes, Professor. When we pass light speed. Is there any sensation?" "You mean, do we feel it? Or see something?" "Sorry to disappoint you, but no, well, other than a Doppler effect." She spoke hesitantly, slightly embarrassed. "I thought with the shockwave. The hydrogen wall?" She was a scientist, and it felt slightly humiliating asking a soldier to explain scientific fact. "My science is planet-bound. The accumulation of hydrogen, moments before light speed, kept us prisoner until we developed tunneling. At the moment of ter-electron shockwave, the radiation will be extreme, but we will pass through too quickly for harm to be done." Then the vibrations? What you're feeling is the black hole. I thought you knew. She tried to smile. A briefing is not the same as the experience. Of course. 80%, interrupted Clarice. He again spoke to Rhea. Close down non-essential systems, divert power to hull integrity. Then back to her. Professor, stop me if I go over what you know, but when you hear of talk about the warrior, or any other craft traveling at light speed, it actually means just that. I remember a lecturer I once had describing it to me. Light speed is like a dike on a plane. You have two steep embankments with a channel between. If you take a long enough run, and if you have enough strength, you can get up the outside of the embankment. Then you run down with ease into the channel. Now you can run up along the channel as far as you want. But say you wanted to get to the other side. By standing on top of the first embankment, you could run down and across the channel as many times as you like, but without the run-up you would probably never make it to the top. That's why the early experiments never got past light speed, and traveled at it, well, as good as. And getting back? The channel scenario is purely an analogy. In the return case, think more of an electron field losing energy and dropping back out of orbit. Returning doesn't present us with too many problems, though again apparently it did to the pioneers. So how do we get to tachyon space, according to your lecturer? Easily, if you can't climb over a wall, you dig through both embankments, and come out the other side. Hence, we tunnel. Your teacher seems to have been a very down-to-earth person. Alexei turned in his chair and looked at her. Is that a pun? No, she said innocently. Well, no. He said, sitting back. He wasn't, but he got the point through. So our digging tool is the black hole? Yes. Correct me if I'm wrong, she knew she wasn't. But doesn't time slow the closer we come to light speed, to the point where time as good as ceases to exist? Yes, and the time warping becomes the key to leaving this reality. It's all in the... He hesitated, searching for a suitable word, but couldn't find one. Approach. That sounds almost like cheating, she said, slightly disappointed. I was under the impression the warrior had some amazing ability to zip between time epochs at the flick of a switch. Alexei's voice was defensive. I'm simply pointing out the physics. He wondered if her apparent lack of knowledge was real. Did she say something only to make him underestimate her? Intelligent women sometimes did that to make a man feel smarter, but why would she? Tunneling is still not well known, and until we have more experience we stick to the basics. What we do know is that approaching the event horizon in different ways produces an opposite effect on the departure. Our engines are at zero thrust while we are approaching the event horizon. At a precise moment we commit everything the ship has in one burst, so instead of time slowing until it appears to stop, we achieve light speed at the boundary of the virtual particle emission jet. A little bit of fancy flying and we're ejected out, the other side of light speed, mirror image into tachyon space. As easy as that? As easy as that. What makes me think you're glossing over the negatives? Negatives? Like actually entering the event horizon. Approaching at the wrong angle or velocity, and being torn into atoms. Appearing in a parallel bubble. Shall I go on? I didn't think you wanted to know about things like that. I don't. So please don't point out anything that I have missed. The swirling ring was almost filling their view. Rhea tried to see where it began, but the color change from black to deep red was so subtle that she couldn't. It just seemed that the blackness of space merged into the outer reaches of the dust ring. The same could not be said for the distant lip of the void itself. Here the particles had been so superheated by friction that they glowed the most brilliant white, until suddenly they dropped out of existence. There at that point, the line between black and white was so sharp and abrupt that it hurt her eyes to concentrate on it. As remarkable as the sight was, it was the omission that her eyes sought. Their lifeline, the road they would ride out and follow to the unknown. It was there, faint, but becoming clearer with every passing moment. It too seemed to appear out of nowhere. A fountain of particles reaching up and out into space, away from the axis of the whole like a giant spray of glitter. Somewhere between the two visual displays lay their future, and ultimately that of mankind's. She was acutely aware that she was prepared to trust this man with her life, but not with the secret she carried. "Would you tell me when we reach light speed?" she said. "I won't have to. Listen to number one. She'll talk us all the way through." As if she had heard, Clary spoke. "Approaching committal point, Commander." His voice lost all of the apparent friendliness of an instant ago. A bold, confident tone now carried the clear and sharp words. "Affirmative. Take us in. We may all die in a few moments from now." Rhea thought, but Ellis was right, she would have gone with the best. Her reassured thoughts evaporated at the sudden screaming of an alarm. Rhea's heart sprang up into her throat. The lights failed and the room fell into darkness. It was only with the most extreme will that she did not cry out. She felt her lips dry, her skin began to crawl. Her breath came in short gasps. But she was the only one. No one else muttered a word as the cabin became bathed in a red glow. "Battle station ready," said Clary's calm, efficient voice. Rhea forced herself to breathe slowly. Her heart felt as if it was about to tear out of her breast. Slowly she realized they were on the ultimate level of alert. For a moment her fear had almost betrayed her again. The swirling disk filled their forward view. It was as if nothing else existed in the universe except the brilliant whirlpool that was about to consume them. The slow, almost sedate rotation of moments ago was rapidly changing to a vision of confused violence, as the outermost fringes passed underneath. After millennia drift, the grains of dust, boulders, and mountain-sized chunks jostled and crashed together, in their last throes of existence, seemingly meters below. The command room was silent as everyone concentrated on their tasks. Rhea wished there was a noise. The tick-tock of her great-grandmother's timepiece would feel so welcome now. Would she ever go back to the isolated mountain again? The red glow below had disappeared. Now they passed over the yellowing zone. Almost gone was the chaos. The unfortunate rocks had been whipped into submission as they sped along in orderly overlapping lines. They were almost there. "Approaching zero thrust," said Clarice casually. Rhea remembered a lecture she had attended. It was lamely announced as psychological effects relating to the human physiology in extreme gravity conditions. The lecture had been as dry as the title, but one thing jumped back into her mind. At zero thrust the whole had complete power over them. As if she understood Rhea's thoughts, Clarice spoke. Zero thrust. Rhea knew that at this moment, at this time, the gravity drawing them to oblivion was stronger than the power they had available to get out. If they didn't get through to the ejection field, she was already as good as dead. .9 light. Even as the woman said it, Rhea could feel that they were slowing down. She felt the warrior was dropping, her stomach lifted. Of course it was an illusion, and one that still seemed incomprehensible. The faster you went, the slower you traveled. Is it any wonder she had chosen metallurgy? Metal was metal. Rock was rock. It was something you could always rely on to be the same. Rhea tried to focus her academic mind on the scene below. It seemed almost stationary now, but she knew they were traveling incredibly fast. Deep in her memory she remembered the face of a teacher, somewhere, sometime, telling her there was a paradox. Simpkins paradox. Actions were relevant only to the time frame of observation. If she looked away, inside the warrior, everything was normal. Outside was anything but. Mass increased, stretched, slowed, everything that common sense told her it couldn't, it did. Was there any wonder that observing a second frame from the first caused a paradox that the mind dealt with in terms of the first frame? Everything was an optical, a neuroptical illusion. 0.95. Ever more slowly creeping over into the brilliant white of oblivion. The mountains were no more. The boulders had crumbled to powder. Her friends the rocks had no benefit of hull integrity. Outside dust was the order of the day. 0.96. The warnings came more frequently now, or was it her imagination? 0.97. The vibration had given way to a definite, nerve-wracking bucking, when at last Alexei spoke. Maximum internal gravity. Rhea felt herself glued to her chair. 0.98. This is the commander speaking. The voice carried throughout the craft. We are about to achieve light speed. For those of you never having experienced it before, there may be slight psychological discomfort. It will. Rhea anxiously wondered what he meant by psychological discomfort. He hadn't mentioned anything before. 0.99. Droned Clarice. Soon pass. I'll talk to you on the other side. She noted how confident he seemed. That was not how he had come across before. Had he tried to unsettle her? Was it some power trip he enjoyed holding over non-flyers? 0.995. She stared at the solar shield. Now there was only blackness below. It gave her a sick hollow feeling, the same one she had in the mountains when standing too close to the edge, and knowing just emptiness lay below her. She lifted her eyes from the complete abyss toward the fountain of streaming yellow particles dancing tantalizingly before them. 0.997. Clarice was almost speaking continually now. 98. Rhea realized she wasn't breathing. She couldn't. 9. She wanted to close her eyes, but couldn't. Even Clary's voice had taken on an urgent emotion. Light speed. Superheating. Ignition. At last Alexei spoke. Maximum power to reactors. Nothing seemed to happen. Rhea gripped the armrests with white knuckles. Her mind told her that they still hurtled forward, and downward. Had the engines misfired? The terrifying thought screamed in her brain. She couldn't see Alexei's expression. A feeling of nausea swept over her. Bring her up, his voice seemed so welcome, so comforting. But nothing happened. Time did stand still. A season, 2, 3, they seemed to peel away from her life as she looked into absolute nothingness. Then at long last they were lifting. Gradually the warrior was tearing itself away from the void. Time we were out of here, said Alexei to no one in particular as he coaxed the warrior's nose reluctantly away from the blackness. Slowly, so very slowly, the emission stream began to ease across their forward view. Even slower it moved down past them. Then almost as if by magic they had it beneath, and the welcome speckled blackness of space emerged above. Their relative speed was building and they began to move over the emission stream. Glancing urgently up, she could see nothing in the rear-view screen, but she knew there behind was the singularity, hidden, still drawing, still waiting for them, still ready and unwilling to give up its meal without a fight. Now they were running under every gram of power the warrior could produce. Skimming along the emission fountain's edge until it sped under them as they picked up its ejection energy, and were spat out of the hole's gravity sump, like a baby's pacifier from the mouth of oblivion. Now everything seemed to happen in an instant, as they rocketed forward at an unbelievable speed. The shrinking hole dwindling to a total nothingness behind, as around them the stars changed, red to blue, blue to red. Suddenly there was the alarm again, but this time not as shrill, not as long, and accompanied by the faint flickering between the red glow and bright normal light. "Cut internal gravity, re-establish normal working modes," said Alexei, as he released his own harness and stood. "Professor? Are we there? In tachyon space?" "Yes. We are, and traveling back in time?" He nodded. "I can't be precise, but I'd guess you were born in the region of 30 instants ago." "What?" Her eyebrows lowered in part confusion. "In theory we should be traveling back in the region of 6 seasons per instant." "We are?" She smiled. "Something like that. Don't hold me to it, but around 8 sleeps from now, as my children would say, and we'll be seeing the truths or myths about." Whatever Alexei was about to say was interrupted by Philip, the navigation officer. He was a little older than Alexei. In fact, he was the oldest crewman on the Warrior. "Commander." Alexei looked away from Rhea. It puzzled him why Philip had called to him so abruptly. He was supremely conscientious. In fact, too much so, and Alexei had to take him aside to try and get him to lighten up on more than one occasion. It was to no avail. Philip seemed to be out to prove himself. Rumor had it that he felt he was too old for combat, and was constantly on the lookout to show he was up to it. "Yes, Nav? I have a reading that does not compute, Commander." "In what way?" "I can't explain its reason." "Tell me." "As we came out of tunneling, the hole was resealing itself. Then it seemed to fluctuate." "Seemed?" "It did fluctuate," he said more sharply. "Can you be more specific?" "It was half closed. It opened, and then closed again." "Could that be expected?" "Theoretically, no. But without data from a number of tunnels we can't know what is normal or what's not." "Explanations?" "Only one that I can think of right now. That we drew something out of the accretion disk and took it with us." There was doubt in Alexei's voice. "Is that possible?" "Probably not, but everything is new from now on." "Any direct consequences to the ship?" "I don't see any, but I'll get the analytical systems to run possible scenarios." "All right. Keep me informed." Alexei moved away after Rhea, but his mind was on Philip. It was strange for the man to bring what appeared such a minor thing to his attention. Still, tunneling was new, and Philip was just being Philip. The following day was spent in relaxed anticipation, and while there was a colossal amount of data to record, and observations to be made, and had been made since before the moment they committed to the tunneling, most was done automatically. In reality, tachyon space was little different in real terms to normal space, but then it was the same space, just another version of it. After the first burst of eagerness and rechecking checked equipment, both scientists and crew settled down to the semi-tedium of deep space flights. But several days later the morning was different. Alexei smelt the fresh scent of Kalan. His mind swam with pleasure as he ran through the undergrowth, chased by his laughing children. He deliberately stumbled to the ground as they caught up with him, and piled on top of his weakly protesting body. A smile covered his face as his eyes opened. Out of the corner of his eye he looked at the stark command quarters, and before him the back of a still sleeping Kale. He sighed deeply, making a mental note to reprogram his rouser. It depressed him now, rather than putting him in a good mood for the day. He came onto the bridge, still fastening his uniform. Clarice and Philip were talking. "Good morning, Commander." "Sorry to break into your slumber," she said as he came through the doorway. Are you?" he mumbled, forcing a smile. "Oh, I think so. A while ago we picked up an anomaly on the photon receptor." He crossed the room to their side and stared at the display. "I see," he said with rising interest. "How long?" "Mid-second half." "Have you informed Professor Thane?" Stone has gone to wake her." A few moments later the door opened and Rio walked in. She looked disheveled, and still half asleep. Alexei didn't know how much rest she had, but it obviously wasn't enough. "I'm sorry we had to wake you, Professor," he said. "But we have something that will interest you." He pointed to the display. It showed a bright point of light against a velvet background of sharp but smaller specks. "Earth. Already?" She looked at him in surprise. "No, Professor, something far more interesting." He waited a moment as if to tease her. "In a short time we will be the first people in our unrecorded history to look upon the arcs."